Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Bookmark. Tonight I'm going to preview a really unusual but very beautiful book. It's called The Secret Lives of Colour. It's by Kassia St Clair and it's got a very attractive photograph on the front. This is the hardback copy. It's now out in paperback. It came out in 2016. But the hardback copy is beautiful and unusual. One of the best presented books that I've come across. It's got a white cover with all sorts of dots and colours in it, and that's the point, because it's about The Secret Lives of Colour tells the unusual stories of the 75 most fascinating shades, dyes and hues, the colours. From blonde to ginger, the brown that changed the way battles were fought, to the white that protected against the plague, Picasso's blue period to the charcoal on the cave walls at Lascaux, acid yellow to Kelly green, and from scarlet women to imperial purple. These surprising stories run like a bright thread throughout history. In this book, Kassia St Clair has turned her lifelong obsession with colours and where they come from into a unique study of human civilization. Across fashion and politics, art and war, The Secret Lives of Colour tells the vivid story of our culture. And basically what she does is that some years ago, as an art and clothes designer, she got fascinated by old articles on dress and clothing in historic periods in the past, and she began to get a fascination for colours and the colours of materials and other artifacts. And so she started researching the story behind the colours and the shades that we take for granted so often. And then in a magazine she started to write a monthly column, and after a while she realised she had quite a lot of material, and an editor encouraged her to collate all these articles and produce a book, which she has done, The Secret Lives of Colour. And it's a beautiful book. Inside you've got the spectrum of colour, and then as you move inside, again it's a book that isn't just a wonderful text, but it actually is one of the most beautifully presented books that I've seen. And it gives you all the different colours: lead white to beige, blonde to gold, Dutch orange to nude, Baker Miller pink to amaranth. Next page, scarlet through to dragon's blood, Tyrian purple through to violet, ultramarine through to cerulean, verdigris to caledon, a lot of colours I hadn't heard of, from khaki to taupe, and from coal to pitch black. So she runs the whole gamut and spectrum of all the colours. And one of the fascinating things that she tells us in this is about how we see, about colour vision, which you may well know, but I'm going to read this first couple of pages to give you just an indication of how we see, and then give you a little indication of the contents of the book. But it really is a beautiful book. I've learned a lot from it, and I think anyone is bound to do so. Here's what she says. Colour is fundamental to our experience of the world around us. Think of high-vis jackets, brand logos, and the hair, eyes and skin of those we love. But how is it precisely that we see these things? What we are really seeing when we look at, say, a ripe tomato or green paint is light being reflected off the surface of that object and into our eyes. The visible spectrum, as you can see from the diagram on page 14 over the page, here we are. The visible spectrum is that tiny little sliver or strip, but the whole spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum is vast and huge, so we only see a tiny proportion of that whole spectrum. So when we think about sight and seeing being predominant in life, that's really only a kind of misperception. We perceive so much more than we can see, which maybe says something about our relationship to God, whom we cannot see. She continues, the visible spectrum, as you can see from the diagram on the page I showed, only makes up a small proportion of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Different things are different colours because they absorb some wavelengths of the visible light spectrum while others bounce off. So the tomato skin is soaking up most of the short and medium wavelengths, blues and violets, greens, yellows and oranges. The remainder, the reds, hit our eyes and are processed by our brains. So in a way, the colour we perceive an object to be is precisely the colour it isn't. That is the segment of the spectrum that is being reflected away. When light enters our eyes, it passes through the lenses and hits the retinas. These are at the back of our eyeballs and are stuffed with light-sensitive cells called rods and cones because of their respective shapes. Rods do the heavy lifting of our vision. We have about 120 million in each eye. They are incredibly sensitive and principally distinguish between light and dark. But it is the cones that are most responsive to colour. We have far fewer of these, around 6 million in each retina, the majority huddled together in a small central spot called the macula. Most people have 3 different types of cone, each tuned to light of different wavelengths: 440 nanometers, 530 nanometers, and 560 nanometers. About 2/3 of these cells are sensitive to longer wavelengths, which means we see more of the warm colours, yellows, reds, and oranges, than the cooler colours in the spectrum, the blues and the greens. Around 4.5% of the world's population are colourblind or colour deficient because of faults in our cone cells. The phenomena is not completely understood, but it is usually genetic and is more prevalent in men. Around 1 in 12 men are affected compared to 1 in 200 women. For people with normal colour vision, when cone cells are activated by light, they relay the information through the nerve system to the brain, which in turn interprets this as colour. This sounds straightforward, but the interpretation stage is perhaps the most confounding. A metaphysical debate over whether colours really physically exist or are only internal manifestations has raged since the 17th century. The squall of dismay and confusion on social media over the, remember it, blue and black, or was it white and gold dress in 2015 shows how uncomfortable we are with the ambiguity. This particular image made us acutely aware of our brain's post-processing. Half of us saw one thing, the other half saw something completely different. This happened because our brains normally collect and apply cues about the ambient light, whether we are in full daylight or under an LED bulb, for example, and also the texture of the material. We use these cues to adjust our perception, like applying a filter over a stage light. The poor quality and lack of visual clues, like skin colour in the dress image, meant that our brains had to guess at the quality of the ambient light. Indeed, the ambient light behind me in the evening as I'm recording this. Some people with that dress intuited that the dress was being washed out by strong light, and therefore their minds tuned the colours to darken them. Others believed the dress to be in shadow, so their minds adjusted what they were seeing to brighten it and remove the shadowy blue cast. That is how an internet full of people looking at the same image saw very different things. Then there's a chapter on simple arithmetic on light. She talks about additive colour mixing. Colours are created by mixing different colours, coloured lights. Combining the 3 primaries produces white. But then you have a process called subtractive colour mixing, which you use in painting. By mixing a limited set of colours, many others can be created. A perfect mixture of primaries will yield black. And she draws the distinction between when you reflect or the white light through a prism, and you get the prism of light, like the Pink Floyd A Dark Side of the Moon cover. But the reverse of that is when children try to mix together all these paints and then create a new colour. Nearly every time you do that, what happens is that everything darkens each other and you end up with just a really mucky mess. So there's a real science and art, if you excuse the pun, to how you mix colours, and artists are the great masters of doing so. There are wonderful chapters here about chromophilia, chromophobia, politics of colour, colourful language, do words shape the shades that we see? And then she moves into the main part of the book, and she basically goes through all the different colours in that spectrum that we see. And this are the various shades of white or cream. Lead white ivory, silver, whitewash, isabelline, chalk and beige. So she has a chapter, and each chapter is illustrated with a story of how the colour has been used in life or interpreted, but also as you move through the book, the colours on the side illustrate the colour in question. So here we've got blonde, lead tin yellow, Indian yellow, acid yellow, Naples yellow, chrome yellow, gamboge, orpiment, imperial yellow and gold. Many of these shades were completely new to me. When you move on to such a colour as red, you'll find that red is the colour of passion, of anger. It's used in more football kits for football teams. It's meant to give success and luck. Red is the predominant colour in national flags in the world. It speaks of danger. It speaks of intensity. It speaks of all those kind of very passionate aspects of life. And then when you move on to something like purple, it's purple is associated with regality and nobility. And she moves right through the spectrum. There's a gypsum blue, for instance, and other colours. There's a story behind each shade and each colour. And as I say, it is a really unusual book, a lovely book, beautifully presented. And I would suggest if you can get the hardback copy as this is, it's more durable, but the cover in the hardback, I think, has got this distinct or unique pock marks where you've got the different colours. I think the paperback doesn't have that and isn't as striking or as durable. So there's a lot of stuff in this. It would be very difficult for me to lift out particulars from it, but just a little clue that The Secret Lives of Colour takes a very unusual look and gives a lot of detail on how life is bright and vivid and colourful and wonderful. And it's a book from which everyone will emerge with an enhanced appreciation of colour, but also of how colour has been involved in the very history of humanity and how we interact with the world around us. One little nugget from that I picked up was the ancient Greeks didn't really get the colour blue. And when you think of how strange that is for us, I mean, the Greek islands with beautiful weather and beautiful seas and beautiful scenery, when we see images on holiday or on the TV, we think vivid blue, the most beautiful aquamarine blue. And yet when Homer was writing the Iliad and the Odyssey, the adventures, remember, of Ulysses and Odysseus and Achilles and all the rest, there's a line in it that always struck me as being very strange. He talked about the wine red sea. Now, if to my mind, the sea around Greece is not wine red, it's blue aquamarine and strikingly beautiful. So it just goes to show that different eras within human history have perceived the world around them, including in particular colour, in very different ways. So again, much to think about, not just at an ordinary level, but also a philosophical level. If we can only see a tiny sliver of life, that tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, that tiny visible slice, what might that say about the deep mystery of the most wonderful things, God especially, whom we cannot in fact properly and fully see? So a book tonight about the wonders of colour, but also just a little hint about aspects of our Christian faith as well. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week and we will look at another book in Bookmark. God bless and keep well.